What's up everyone, it's Endymion, and the time is upon us, where the savior of the Xbox brand has arrived upon the shores of modern gaming. With the release of Starfield finally within the hands of eager early access players, but is it enough to save the Xbox brand? And if not, why? It's a somewhat uncomfortable truth that extends beyond just the existence of Starfield itself. This is a complicated situation years in the making, where we're reaching a point where the current status quo will likely burst. So can Starfield save Xbox? My simple answer is no, it can't. That's not to say it won't delight players and garner a robust modding community. It will likely have plenty of staying power if it ends up like anything else mainline Bethesda has made in the past. But at its core, Starfield is an anomaly within the structure that it exists within. And it's very likely that we'll never see another release of this magnitude on Xbox for years to come. One of these reasons is that Starfield was very obviously meant to be a multi-platform game. It was originally in development long before Microsoft went ahead and purchased the entire Bethesda brand. So naturally the game was not designed for something like Game Pass originally anyway. That being said, it also comes down to simple economics as well. Starfield is a massive game, costing around $200 million to develop over its 8 years of development. Just speaking from a money perspective, a game of this size and budget can't exactly recoup its costs over something like a subscription service. It's also why PlayStation's higher-ups already confirmed they would never consider releasing their big budget AAA games onto PlayStation Plus day one, since financially it would make zero sense. For comparison, as of August 2023, God of War Ragnarok has crossed 11 million copies sold. Let's just say, for simplicity's sake, that each of those copies were sold for full price. That would mean Ragnarok made almost $800 million in revenue since its release last year. If Ragnarok had released on PS Plus day one, sure, it would have boosted their subscription rates for a time, but generally speaking, the amount of money Sony would have made versus selling Ragnarok as a premium game is nowhere near as profitable. From Forbes.com, we have this article that states Game Pass may have more subscribers than the lower tier streaming services, like Peacock for example. Despite this, Microsoft has been pretty quiet on their subscription numbers, which isn't only worrying, but it's sadly expected. In 2022, for example, Game Pass subscriptions fell short of their projections, with only a 28% increase when Microsoft was projecting at least 73%. While this may seem fine still, since they have roughly 25 million people subscribed to Game Pass, the unfortunate truth is that the subscription bubble is going to burst across the industry. I don't mean just games either, with streaming platforms like Disney Plus for example hemorrhaging money at staggering paces. Because of subscriptions in general, it's not only diluting the content being made, it's causing customers to not invest as heavily as they used to. In Disney Plus's case, the existence of that platform has ruined their theatrical releases, since customers now know they don't really have to go to the theater to see their movies. They can just wait 2 months and watch it at home, and it's had a massive impact on Disney's bottom line. You don't need to be a genius to understand that Starfield would absolutely make more money if it sold at full price than being on Game Pass. You can't argue really that having every customer paying around $70 for the game, as opposed to buying 1 month of Game Pass to play it, would obviously generate way less revenue for Microsoft. And they know that their Game Pass model is having diminishing returns, and it's becoming increasingly expensive for them to maintain and keep the subscription filled with content every month. Currently, Game Pass costs around $11 a month, or $17 if you got the ultimate version. But even then, that means Microsoft would make as much as one person buying Starfield at full price for every maybe 5 or 6 people paying the subscription price to play it. And this isn't even unique to Xbox, since recently PlayStation has raised the prices of PlayStation Plus by roughly 33% across the board. And starting September 6, 2023, annual PS Plus rates will rise from $60 to $80 and premium from $120 to $160 a year. None of this is surprising if you've kept up to date on the state of streaming in general across the industries. It's becoming increasingly more apparent that the current structure of streaming services are largely just not sustainable. Starfield was simply made into a Game Pass game because, again, Bethesda was bought by Microsoft during its development. And the existence of Game Pass only exists because Microsoft has openly stated that they can't compete in terms of quality titles with Sony or Nintendo. The simple but really sad truth is that Game Pass is having diminishing returns across the board, and outside of Starfield there really isn't much coming that could save Game Pass or Xbox. It's unfortunate as well because I think a strong Xbox ecosystem is necessary for the gaming industry. Not only because of its ownership of series like Halo, but because without Xbox's existence, it gives PlayStation and Nintendo very little competition or reason to innovate. After all, PS Plus being completely rebranded and offering new titles like Sea of Stars for example, it only exists because of Game Pass. And if Xbox staple titles like Halo Infinite couldn't save Game Pass, Starfield unfortunately won't either. Realistically, Microsoft would need a Starfield level release every 2 months at least in order to keep building its momentum. But that's obviously impossible, especially when a game like it takes almost a decade to make. Subscriptions in terms of games anyway largely only seem to be profitable for basic level stuff like playing online, or when the subscription model is paid for one single game, like Final Fantasy XIV Online for example. But when you have a community of customers who all want different genres in games, it's impossible for Game Pass or PS Plus to ever really meet the expectations of their consumer base. To be real with you, even if Sony suddenly announced that Spider-Man 2 would be coming to PS Plus, it wouldn't really boost the service in the long run. For the short term, sure, but ultimately after the hype has died down and the game's novelty has passed, the amount of revenue generated by a PS Plus Day 1 release of Spider-Man compared to just selling the game like normal would be astronomically different in terms of gross revenue. Then there's Starfield's reception, which as of the making of this video has an 88 on Metacritic, and around 86 or 87 on Xbox. It's a solid score, hell it's actually really good considering everything it has going against it, but it's not even in the top 5 Metacritic scores of the year. And there's one review specifically that's dividing fans in the form of IGN's, who gave the game a 7 out of 10, which has made the Xbox community very unhappy. Places like Reddit are already discussing the controversial review score, but the reviewer in question, Dan Stapleton, had quite a lot to say about Starfield. IGN says Starfield has terrible item management, with roughly 30% of the experience being just you sitting in an inventory screen moving stuff around. There's also apparently no map for exploration, meaning you're kind of blindly stumbling through levels with no concept of the layout of your surroundings. While having no map for say an uncharted world makes sense, it's bizarre that the human cities at the very least don't have a map. That's a very bizarre omission for a game like this, but it is something they can add later. One of the larger complaints I've seen across many reviews from IGN, ACG, and more is that outside of these dev-made planets, Starfield suffers from repetitive, randomly generated planets. They also have little to nothing to do on them and simply exist for players to farm for resources. And this is not a good thing since one of Starfield's biggest selling points is the existence of interstellar travel. But it falls into the same issue that vanilla No Man's Sky does. That once you actually get to these planets, there isn't much of anything to do really. What Starfield does here with its random generation of content, and I use that word very loosely, is very troubling to me personally. Because there's this annoying obsession with wanting to make every big game even larger and vast. Yet it's obviously impossible, as of now anyways, to fill these stupidly huge worlds with meaningful content. A big world to explore is cool I guess to an extent, but when it's just rocks and nothing else, I would argue that's not exactly content. And like IGN and other reviews have said, it's disappointing that these infinite planets simply exist for resources, basically. IGN also claims outside of its quest, Starfield is condensed into scanning stuff and shooting random things for the majority of it. While I'm sure this will be fun for the first few hours or days, I'm very interested to see how the community responds to it several months down the road once the novelty has worn off. And unsurprisingly, the game has quite a few bugs, but thankfully it's not as bad as previous Bethesda releases, which I personally think that's incredible. Especially considering who made this, so the fact this is the least buggy release from Bethesda is honestly a massive win. So congrats to them on that, seriously. But largely speaking, Starfield is a lot like Bethesda's previous games. It's basically Fallout in space, and while there's nothing wrong with that, it's unsurprising to see that that's what it ultimately ended up becoming. And as I was writing this, GameSpot just released their review for Starfield as well, and they gave it a 7. Yikes. They say Bethesda's spacefaring adventure has its moments with impressive scale, satisfying combat, and some worthwhile side quests. But its shallow RPG systems and uninspired vision of the cosmos make for a journey that's a mile wide but an inch deep. GameSpot also claims Starfield has shallow RPG mechanics and uninspired story, underwhelming space exploration, and like IGN said already, a terrible in-game map. Ah man. Look, I know you might have thought this video was just going to be me pulling my pants down and unloading a fat one in Xbox's mouth, but honestly, I want this game to do well because it'll push PlayStation and other companies to do better too. But it's frustrating that the supposed savior of Xbox is a polarizing experience of insane highs and depressing lows. And it continues this annoying trend of games marketing themselves as RPGs while dumbing down or having surface level RPG mechanics. It's also a complaint people had about Final Fantasy XVI, for example, that it's more an action game than an RPG, which I agree with as well, so it's unfortunately like that. But what I hope the industry learns from Starfield is that developers should be allowed to take more risks when making games. But unfortunately, I think the lesson most companies and executives will take from this is to invest less in dedicated quest designs, and instead focus on randomly generated nonsense content. Maybe I'm in the minority on this one, but I will take an expertly crafted world level design wise like Bloodborne or Dark Souls over the vast emptiness and pointless resource managing of something like Starfield. I personally don't think games need to be bigger in order to become better. The industry as a whole is too focused on quantity instead of quality as it is. I can definitely see a potential future where a year or two from now Starfield evolves into something truly special. Obviously, as of now anyway, the game has no multiplayer component, which is kind of bizarre given how much effort has gone into this game already. But Bethesda could easily turn Starfield into an MMO-like game. However, also knowing Bethesda, I wouldn't put it past them to eventually create a Starfield 76 version of it like they did with Fallout. Hopefully to better results as well, but it is unfortunate that so much pressure is riding on the performance and release of this game. And it also brings up another interesting situation as well, since people are claiming Starfield is the savior of the Xbox brand when the game itself wasn't even made by Microsoft to begin with. It just happened to be a big game that got acquired is all. But I genuinely can't see Microsoft going forward with releasing every first-party title in the future day one on Game Pass, since economically speaking, as I showed you already, it's a service of severe diminishing returns no matter how you spin it. And I'm sure Bethesda knows very well that they are losing tons of money in sales by holding this game back from PlayStation, as well as putting it behind a subscription model on Xbox as well. And what I said before, I truly do believe that these subscription services will eventually go belly up before long. Even for a billion-dollar company like Microsoft, the writing is on the wall. But I just wonder how long they'll wait until they finally admit it, and I also wonder what state they'll be in as a company once that inevitable future comes to pass. But as it stands right now, with the early reviews out, it seems like Starfield sticks the landing for the most part. It won't shake the industry, I think, the same way Baldur's Gate 3 has, and I doubt Starfield will win Game of the Year either, but it's looking like a fun time that'll bolster Game Pass for now at least. Do I think it'll come to PlayStation eventually? Absolutely. I say within a year, you'll see an announcement for it. I would honestly be surprised if it didn't. But hopefully games don't adopt the Starfield design too hard. Cause personally, I'd rather have a game as wide as a lake but deep as an ocean, than a game as wide as an ocean but deep as a puddle. But that's just me. But let me know what you think of the current state of Starfield and whether it'll save Xbox or not. Like the video to help the channel out and subscribe for more content in the future as well. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.